So this is interesting. This is actually hilarious. I don't know if anyone's caught the interview by the president of Guyana about the current oil discovery in the country. Now, Guyana, for those that don't know, is a small country in South America and is the only country in the world whose GDP has been growing substantially since 2020, since the pandemic. Only country in the world. So, just to let you know the impact of the Guyana oil boom, I want to share with you this. So Guyana's offshore oil sector is booming with over 11 billion barrels of oil equivalent of resources discovered so far, and an ExxonMobil-led consortium advancing what could prove to be its seventh development in the region. Now, how big is this boom? There's this, so it's all offshore. This is Guyana off to the bottom. Don't know if you can see that. See if I can zoom in a little bit. So this is Guyana off to your bottom left here, and this is the area off Guyana's waters that are its that are within its borders. There's a series of oil discoveries in this region called the Stabroek Block, after Stabroek. The Dutch were originally in Guyana. Long before the British. In Stabroek, you'll see some Dutch names throughout Guyana. But anyhow, I know all of this because that's my background. My background's Guyanese. So you can see all of these are discoveries of oil in just a small section of the Stabroek Block. Now, a lot of oil companies are saying there's even more oil being discovered in other blocks off Guyana's shore. Again, this is within Guyana's catchment area. And off to the right here, you can see Guyana's crude output expected to rise as more fields come on stream. So in 2020, it was, basically less than 0.1. 2024, where we're at right now, is 0.5 million barrels. And by 2030, they're looking at 1.25 million barrels per day. I don't know if BOE/D means that, but if it does, we're talking about a lot of oil, a ton of oil, so much oil. It's unbelievable. And the other thing to note with this, which is really interesting as well, is that Guyana is actually also a protector of rainforests. So this is also interesting. If you look at the Guyana map of the rainforest, so Guyana, this is a very small country in northern South America, and 95% of the entire population is along this coastline. And on the top coastline with the Atlantic, and all that in green is dense vegetation, as you can see. Dense tropical forest, seasonally flooded tropical forest with scattered marsh and swamp off to the sides, but 90% of all of Guyana's landmass is dense tropical forest that is protected. Protected in partnership between the government and the indigenous peoples. Well, as you can imagine, with this oil boom, it's caught the attention of many international news agencies in countries around the world. And interestingly enough, the BBC went down to interview President Erfan Ali, about the recent oil discoveries. And particularly, there's some consternation about Guyana being this developing nation, and now all this development of oil. Will this contribute negatively to climate change? Very interesting. Let's take a look.
It's an extraordinary figure, but think of it in practical terms. That means, according to many experts, more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions will come from your seabed, from those reserves, and be released into the atmosphere. I don't know if you, as a head of state, went to the COP in Dubai.
Let me stop you right there. Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? A forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive, a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change, I am going to lecture you on climate change, because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero. Guyana will still be net zero. With all our exploration,
a couple of
we'll
points.
still be net zero.
Powerful words, Mr. President.
I just want to pause there. How hilarious is it that the president actually calls out the BBC interviewer on basically trying to call out the Guyanese government on oil production? It's like, you enjoy our oil production. You enjoy the fact that your economies are functioning based on oil and gas from around the world, and you're going to criticize Guyana again with the largest protected, I believe one of the largest protected rainforests in the world. And let me say, protected. I'm not a member of the Guyanese government. I'm not a member of the People's Party in Guyana. But these are the facts. This is what President Erfan Ali is trying to tell the BBC. Very interesting. Let's keep it rolling.
I'm not completed as yet. I am not finished as yet. I am just not finished as yet, because this is the hypocrisy that exists in the world. The world in the last 50 years has lost 65% of all its biodiversity. We have kept our biodiversity. Are you valuing it? Are you ready to pay for it? When is the developed world going to pay for it? Or are you in the pockets? Are you in the pockets of those who have damaged the environment? Are you in the pockets? Are you and your system in the pockets of those who destroyed the environment through the Industrial Revolution and now lecturing us? Are you in their pockets? Are you paid by them? Are you paid to keep their message alive? There is no hypocrisy in our position.
The Center for International Environmental Law has described the oil and gas production in Guyana as turning your country from, as you rightly put it, a carbon sink into a potential, quote, carbon bomb. Now, you may say you have every right to exploit that oil and gas.
That is ridiculous. We, even with exploring and production of all our resources, we are going to still be carbon neutral. We are still going to be carbon neutral.
Let me quote you Greenpeace, who say quite simply, to avoid the worst...
Okay, the fact that he's quoting Greenpeace. Are you serious? You're sitting down with the president of Guyana and you're going to quote Greenpeace? No offense to Greenpeace. I mean, it's an organization and it's focused on the environment, of course, but you're talking to the president of Guyana whose country is on this oil boom. You know, there's so many ways this interviewer could have gone about it. Instead of quoting Greenpeace, the interviewer could have said, tell me about the specific methods that Guyana is going to get to carbon zero, to net neutral carbon. You know what I mean? Net neutral carbon, even with this oil boom that's going to set to give off a lot of pollution. That to me would be worthwhile, but no, instead the interviewer goes from the BBC, goes and quotes Greenpeace. Madness.
Impacts of climate change, and you know that your own country is one of the most vulnerable to climate change because most of your population lives below sea level.
And we have paid. Guess what? We have paid for the mitigation. We have paid for the adaptation. We are the ones who have to find revenue. No.
I want to continue. I haven't finished telling you what Greenpeace say.
Yes, but let me tell you.
Greenpeace say we need to keep the majority of the world's remaining fossil fuels in the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. Are you really serious, BBC? You're telling the president of Guyana, or you're just using this as a quote in your interview with the president, that Greenpeace is telling the world to keep fossil fuels in the ground? Are you serious? Try that crap with someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. Don't bring that to a president of a country that's on its economic oil boom right now, that's 4 years deep, and whose economy is growing. By the way, the BBC would never say this trash, and we shouldn't say trash, this stuff, to its own UK Prime Minister. I mean, I can't imagine that this interviewer said that. It blows my mind.
Greenpeace can say
You're
that.
Not doing that.
Greenpeace and you can say that. But we need to get resources and the developing world. We need to get resources to build the sea defenses. We need to get sea defenses to build a drainage and irrigation system. You just said that we're 6 feet below sea level. Who is going to pay for the infrastructure? Who is going to pay for the drainage and irrigation? Who is going to pay for the development and advancement of our country? Are you going to pay? It's not coming from anywhere. It's not coming from Greenpeace or anyone else. Look at the adaptation budget that is required for the developing world. Where is the money coming from?
Isn't there a cynicism?
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. I'm going to actually stop it. It is a quite interesting interview. I want to share that with you. I'll leave a link below, but that just gives you a flavor of the type of hypocrisy I've seen with the West and towards the developing nations on fossil fuel development. You know, President Ali makes a very important point here. You know, Guyana is 6 feet under sea level. And that requires a lot of infrastructure development for protecting that population, right? Like 95% of the population is on the coastline with the Atlantic Ocean. So if they're below sea level, that's serious. So that requires a lot of investment and a lot of work. Now, I will say there's a point to be made about corruption and making sure that the money is going to the right programs and infrastructure and projects in Guyana. I think that's a very valid point because Guyana, if you look at the CIA World Factbook and if you look at many other statistics about Guyana, you'll find that it is very high on the corruption list. Now, that can be very subjective in terms of who's doing that information, who's collecting that information. But the reality is that Guyana is not exactly in the free and clear when it comes to corruption. Corruption is very much rooted in the government and perhaps in other sectors in civil society in Guyana. So that's a legitimate point that should be raised. But that said, President Ali actually does have a really good point about, well, where is the money going to come from? So it's not like the world, it's not like the United States, Canada, other countries are going to say to themselves, okay, well, Guyana is 6 feet below sea levels. Let's build all their infrastructure to protect the entire country. No, it's going to cost billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. Sorry, maybe not hundreds, but tens of billions of dollars to actually build something up and then to sustain it and maintain it. It's going to take large scale investments. And, you know, with many countries like America and others taking a more nationalist approach towards economic development, you know, it's not going to be, Guyana should not bet its future on infrastructure development for handouts from Western countries. So President Ali is definitely within his right to say, we're below sea level. We need funds to protect our population. That money is not going to come from the UK, Canada, United States, and other countries around the world. We know this. Instead, we have to look for alternative sources of revenue, and oil production seems to be the biggest boom for our economic development. What's also interesting about this is the smugness of the reporter, the audacity sometimes that the West has towards the global South about fossil fuels and the development of fossil fuels. Again, the fact that this reporter used Greenpeace, I just can't believe that they did that. It just shows the quality of work that the BBC is doing on this topic. The BBC should have instead said, you know what? There are serious concerns that the IPCC and other large-scale bodies have raised about the burning of fossil fuels. We know this. How is Guyana prepared to address that in a meaningful way? And, you know, the fact that Guyana is taking in the environment into consideration as it develops its oil is there's something to be said for that. Again, for a cash-strapped developing world country whose infrastructure is lacking, who, if you go to Guyana, if you look, there's a really good YouTuber called ARD. I'll leave a link below. If you look at his videos about the ports in Guyana and some of the infrastructure in Guyana, I mean, we're talking very poor country, not nearly as developed as some of the more, you know, not anywhere in the G20. The fact that the Guyanese government is still thinking of the environment despite that, given this oil boom, is something to think about. And I'm sure that the tropical, like you said, deforestation is one of the lowest, if not the lowest rate in the entire world. Very interesting point, again, with work with the indigenous communities. So interesting take from the BBC on Guyana's oil development. something for us to all think about here in the West is a phrase called greenwashing, I think, or green colonialism, one of the two words. Basically, it's saying to countries in the global South, either you engage in quote unquote climate change friendly initiatives, green initiatives, or we're going to withhold funding, or funding's only going to go towards very specific projects. I remember reading a report somewhere. I'll try to find it, but it's about like air conditioners for India and other places around the world. And there was this big like, no, we're not going to provide funding for air conditioners for rural communities because they burn freon and other terrible gases for the environment, despite the fact that air conditioners would actually save lives in India, especially at the height of its dry season with a lot of heat warnings and heat exhaustion and deaths, strokes as a result of heat. So interesting to see that. I think more of us need to speak out against what we're seeing here in the West of greenwashing when it comes to developing nations. They have way more serious concerns than to worry about, you know, windmills and solar and all these things. I mean, those things are important, but when you're talking to a country that has very limited resources and very limited infrastructure, you get oil boom. Guess what? Other very important point to all this: demand for oil and gas will only continue to rise. So the BBC should be asking its own people, why is it that our demand for oil and gas continues to rise year over year despite all of these concerns on the climate? It's a question for us in the West. Why are we demanding it? You know, Guyana's oil boom only works if there's demand. Love to know what you think. Let me know in the comment section below.